The Moonstone by Wilkie Collins, dramatised for radio in 6 parts by Brian Gear, with music composed by Sidney Sager. The Moonstone, Part 1.
Hold out your hand, boy, and make a hollow of your palm. Now I pour the black ink into your hand, so, just a little, and I make the signs over your head. Now, look into the ink and tell me, do you see the English gentleman from foreign parts?
Yes, I see him.
Is it on the road to this house, and on no other road that the English gentleman will travel today?
Yes, on this road, no other.
And does the English gentleman carry with him that which we seek?
Yes, he carries it with him.
Will the English gentleman come here, as he has promised to come, at the close of day?
I don't know.
Why do you not know?
I'm tired. I cannot see into the ink any more.
I blow gently upon your forehead, so. You can wake up, boy. You have done well. Brothers, that is all we need to know. In the meantime, we will return to the town. Come.
My name is Gabriel Betteridge. I am over 70 years of age, though still in good health, thank God, and I am house steward to Lady Verinder, in whose service I have been since I was a lad of 15. This morning, Mr. Franklin Blake came to me and said...
Betteridge, my good friend.
Pray be seated, Mr. Franklin.
Thank you. I've been to the lawyers about some family matters, and among other things, we've been talking of the affair of the Indian diamond.
Oh, dear, dear, dear.
Mr. Brough thinks that the whole story ought to be placed on record in writing, and the sooner the better.
No. Some might say, Mr. Franklin, that the whole thing will be best forgotten. There are those who come out of it very badly.
True, but the characters of innocent people have suffered under suspicion already.
Oh, I don't
It would
know.
hardly do if their memories were to suffer also. I think that we should all tell the story of the diamond in turn.
No, I don't
As
agree.
far as our own personal experience extends, and no further. We must begin by telling how the diamond found its way into my aunt's house in Yorkshire 2 years ago. Nobody knows as much as you do, Betteridge, about what went on in the house at that time. So, you must take the pen in hand and start the story.
Our house is high up on the Yorkshire coast and close by the sea. We have got beautiful walks all round us, in every direction but one. That one leads for 1/4 mile through a plantation of firs and brings you out between low cliffs on the loneliest little bay on all our coast. The sand hills run down to the sea and end in 2 spits of rock jutting out opposite each other. Between the two lies the most horrible quicksand. No boat ever ventures here. No children from our fishing village ever come here to play. The very birds of the air, as it seems to me, give the shivering sand a wide berth. And what, you may ask, was I, Gabriel Betteridge, doing in such a desolate spot on a fine summer morning? Well, I will tell you. I was looking for our second housemaid, Rosanna Spearman, who was late for her dinner. And believe it or not, this was her favourite walk. I saw no sign of Rosanna in the plantation, but when I got on to the beach, there she was, in her little straw bonnet and her plain grey cloak that she always wore to hide her deformed shoulder as much as might be. You've been crying, Rosanna.
I had one of my fainting spells this morning, that's all. I asked if I might come out here for a breath of air.
Oh, yes. Now tell me what you're really crying about.
About the years that are gone. My past life still comes back to me sometimes.
Come, my girl. Your past life is all sponged out. Why can't you forget it?
The stain is taken off Mr. Betteridge, but the place still shows.
No one among the servants knows about the reformatory. No one but my lady and Miss Rachel and me.
But I know. Don't you see?
No, I don't see. That's just foolish talk. Now dry your eyes and come back with me.
I don't want any dinner today. Let me stay a little longer.
Why do you like to come here? It's such a miserable place.
Something draws me to it. I try to keep away, but I can't. Sometimes, Mr. Betteridge, I think that my grave is waiting for me here.
There's roast mutton and suet pudding waiting for you, so go in to dinner directly. This is what comes of thinking on an empty stomach.
Oh, please not to tell my lady I am discontented, Mr. Betteridge. I am not. My mind's unquiet sometimes, that's all.
Well, we'll say no more about it, Rosanna. Now come along. There's much still to do before Mr. Franklin arrives this evening.
What sort of a gentleman is Mr. Franklin?
Why, as to that, I cannot tell you. I haven't seen him these 7 years, but he was the nicest boy that ever broke a window, that I can say. Mind you, he still owes me 7 and 6pence. Mr. Franklin had a hole in his pocket that nothing would sew up.
Cook says his father was a duke.
Cook would do well to hold her tongue, and I shall speak to her when I get back.
Then who was Mr. Franklin's father?
Mr. Franklin's father was plain Mr. Blake. He fancied he was a duke, and spent a considerable fortune trying to prove it. Oh, the whole thing dragged on for years and years, and he was still plain Mr. Blake at the end of it. He took revenge on his country by sending Mr. Franklin abroad to be educated. Then, yesterday morning, came this letter from Mr. Franklin to say he's arriving today to keep Miss Rachel's birthday.
Oh, look, Mr. Betteridge, look. The tide's on the turn. Look at the sand, how it heaves and shivers. It's as if there were hundreds of suffocating people under there, all struggling to get to the surface and all sinking deeper and deeper.
Rosanna.
Throw a stone in, Mr. Betteridge. Throw a stone in and let's see the sand suck it down.
Now, I will not have you talking like this. I will not have it, I say. You just be...
Where are you?
Who's there?
Dear old Betteridge. I owe you 7 and 6pence. Now do you know who I am?
Franklin. Mr. Franklin! Oh, Lord bless and save us. 4 good hours before we expected you.
Mr. Betteridge, thank you. I'll go back now. I'll go back, and I'll try not to have any more silly thoughts.
Yes, that's right, Rosanna, and do try to eat some dinner. It'll do you good.
What a strange girl, Betteridge.
Rosanna Spearman, Mr. Franklin, second housemaid. She's not herself today, but you'll be wanting some luncheon, Mr. Franklin.
Oh, no, Betteridge. There's one advantage to this horrid place. We've got it to ourselves, and I've something to tell you. I dare say you'll hardly credit it, but I suspect I've been followed and watched in London. That's why I'm here 4 hours early. I came by the morning train to give a certain dark-looking stranger the slip.
But who's watching you, sir, and why? Why?
Oh, just a minute. First, tell me about the 3 Indians you've had at the house today. I saw Penelope before I came down here, and she mentioned them. Tell me, Betteridge, what did they do?
Oh, very little, sir. They took themselves off, as I asked them to. There were just 3 of them, and they had a little boy with them. I thought they were jugglers of some kind. They asked if they could put on their show for the lady of the house.
But you straightway told them to leave.
Well, sir, the family silver was on the pantry table, and their manners were so nice that made me suspicious.
And then what?
Well, then I tried to go back to a nice little nap I was having, but I'd scarcely dropped off before Penelope came running up, and she said the Indians knew you were coming, and they meant you some mischief.
What mischief? And how did she know?
Well, she was having a chat with the lodge-keeper's daughter, and they saw the Indians on their way out. Well, you know what women are. They took it into their heads that the little boy, largely on account of his being fair and delicate-looking, was ill-used. So they followed them along the inside of our hedge. They said they saw them pour some sort of ink into the boy's hand.
Ink?
Then they made him look into it and asked him questions about the English gentleman whom Penelope took to mean you, sir.
And what did the boy say?
He said you would be coming along that particular road this evening and that you would be carrying what they were seeking for.
So, what do you make of that, Betteridge?
I'll tell you what I make of it, sir. Plain trickery. Well, I mean, it's obvious, isn't it? They must have heard the servants talking about your arrival and saw their way to making a little money by it. They meant to wait until they saw my lady drive home and then come back and foretell your return as if by magic. What Penelope overheard was them rehearsing all that hocus-pocus. Oh, it all strikes me as just nonsense, doesn't it you, sir?
No, Betteridge, it does not. I suspect that what they seek is this little package.
Really, sir? And what might there be in that little package?
Colonel Herncastle's legacy to his niece, Rachel Verinder. His diamond. The Moonstone.
The Moonstone? And you carrying it about as though it were no more value than a piece of cheese?
My father is the Colonel's executor. He has given it to me to bring down here.
But your father wouldn't have touched the Colonel with a pair of tongs. No one would.
Why not? What is there against the Colonel?
Surely you know that John Herncastle was one of the greatest blackguards that ever lived.
I know that's what everyone says, but why?
Well, sir, take what happened in the army. He had to leave the Guards before he was 22. He went out to India to try a little active service. He was at the taking of Seringapatam, but soon after that he changed into another regiment and then into a third.
Is that a crime?
No, sir. But he came back to England with a character that closed the doors of all his family against him. I've heard say that the diamond was at the bottom of it, or how he came to get the diamond while he was in India.
Did you ever see him yourself?
Only once, about 2 years ago. It was on the night of Miss Rachel's birthday. There was a party, as usual, at my lady's house in London, and John Herncastle came to the door. "Go up to my sister," says he to me, "and say that I have called to wish my niece many happy returns of the day." Well, of course, my lady would have none of him, and when I gave him her answer, he just laughed, and I remember his very words. "Thank you, Betteridge," he said. "I shall remember my niece's birthday." And he walked out of the house. Miss Rachel's next birthday came round, and we heard he was ill. 6 months after that, he was dead.
That would explain it. Listen, Betteridge, it's my belief that certain people in India want to get that diamond back. And more than that, I believe the Colonel, knowing this, has deliberately left a legacy of trouble and danger to his sister through Rachel.
What? Are you sure, Mr. Franklin?
Yes, I'm sure. Well, nearly sure. A few days ago, I had dinner with Mr. Bruff, the family lawyer, and he told me more about it. We see, the Colonel had some papers that my father thought would help him in his claim to the dukedom. Well, as you know, nothing came of it. But he and the Colonel struck a bargain. In return for seeing the papers, my father was to look after the Moonstone, deposit it with his bankers.
But why didn't the Colonel keep it himself?
Because he was afraid that some Indians were on the track of it and would kill him to get it.
Then they would kill your father, wouldn't they?
No, because they probably wouldn't know he had it.
Then they would suppose the Colonel still had it, and what was there to stop them killing him?
He had taken the care to inform them through certain channels that were open to him that if they did, then the Moonstone would immediately be sent to Amsterdam and cut up into a number of smaller stones before they could lay their hands on it. That's how the Colonel hoped to save himself from being murdered.
But the Indians could still raise the value on the smaller stones, couldn't they?
Yes, but the value in money means nothing to them. The Moonstone's value to them lies in its religious significance as a whole stone. Now, that's where the Colonel was so clever. If they killed him, they as good as destroyed the Moonstone themselves. And they would never do that. It's sacred to them.
But are you sure that all this is true, Mr. Franklin? It sounds fantastic to my common-sense way of thinking.
Well, I had it from Mr. Bruff himself, and he drew up the Colonel's will, so he knows all about it.
Now, let me get this clear, sir. You think the Colonel has left the Moonstone to Miss Rachel so as to bring all this danger onto my lady?
Yes, almost certainly.
But suppose my lady had died before the Colonel did, or even, God forbid, but such things do happen, or even suppose that Miss Rachel had died.
In either event, the will provides for the diamond to be cut up and sold, and the proceeds go elsewhere.
Not to Miss Rachel or my lady?
No.
Then it does look black, Mr. Franklin. Black indeed. But on the other hand...
Precisely. On the other hand, we don't know what his intention was. We could be misjudging him. Now, Mr. Bruff says the Colonel was reconciled with the church on his deathbed. Perhaps it's just as it says in the will. The Moonstone is a token of forgiveness for the way Aunt Julia closed her house to him.
But then again, perhaps he took the clergyman in. That's not difficult to do, you know, sir, not when you're telling them what they want to hear.
Now, Betteridge, do you see why I believe there's a conspiracy at the bottom of all this?
I'm beginning to, sir. Though I keep hoping there still might be some perfectly innocent explanation for it.
I don't think there can be. I think it means a plot among the Indians. A plot with some old Hindu superstition behind it.
Mr. Franklin, you said you were followed in London. That was something to do with all this, I take it.
Yes. After I took the Moonstone out of the bank, I thought I was followed by a man with a dark complexion. I went to my father's house to pick up my luggage and found a letter there which unexpectedly detained me in London. So, of course, I had to put the Moonstone back in the strong room again. And again, I thought I saw the man with the dark complexion. Now, I saw him definitely for the third time when I took the Moonstone out of the bank again this morning. So, I took the morning instead of the afternoon train as I'd intended. Now, here I am with the diamond safe and sound, And what is the first news that meets me? I find that 3 strolling Indians have been at the house and that my arrival from London is of particular interest to them.
It could be just coincidence.
Yes. And it could be that in bringing the Moonstone to my aunt's house, I am serving the Colonel's vengeance blindfold. But then again, I could be vindicating him in the character of a penitent and Christian man.
God alone knows, sir. Don't ask me.
Why did my uncle leave the Moonstone to Rachel? Why didn't he leave it to my aunt if he wanted to make his peace with her?
Because he knew my lady well enough to know that she would have refused any legacy that came from him.
Well, how did he know that Rachel might not refuse it too?
Is there any young lady who could resist the temptation of such a birthday present as the Moonstone?
But why did he leave the diamond to Rachel only if her mother is still alive? Now, that's the condition in his will. I even have a copy of that part of it to give to Aunt Julia.
If he has purposely left a legacy of trouble and danger to his sister through her daughter, then it must be conditional on her being alive.
Cigar, Betteridge?
No, thank you very much, sir. I prefer a pipe.
I wish I knew what to do. I don't want to alarm my aunt without reason, and I don't want to leave her without what may be a needful warning. If you were in my place, Betteridge, tell me, in one word, what would you do?
In one word, sir, wait.
With all my heart. But how long?
Now, this is the 25th of May, and Miss Rachel's birthday is on the 21st of June, so we have close on 4 weeks in front of us.
Mm-hmm.
Let's wait and see what happens in that time, and let's warn my lady or not as the circumstances direct us.
Perfect, Betteridge, as far as it goes. But what's to be done with the diamond between this and the birthday?
Put it in the bank at Frizinghall. The Bank of England isn't safer than the Bank at Frizinghall. If I were you, sir, I would ride straight there with it before the ladies come back from their drive.
Excellent! The very thing. Betteridge, you are worth your weight in gold. Come along, back to the house and saddle the fastest horse in the stables. Why, this is the way. I do like to be doing something.
When I heard the last of his horse's hoofs on the drive and found I was alone again in the yard, I felt half inclined to ask myself if I hadn't woken up from a dream. The afternoon wore on, and my lady and Miss Rachel came back.
There, that's my duty done for another month. The rector may be a worthy man, but he is an exceedingly dull one.
My lady, Mr. Franklin has arrived.
Already? But he's not expected until this evening.
Yes, Miss Rachel. That is to say, no, Miss Rachel.
But where is Mr. Franklin?
He has gone away again, my lady.
Gone away again, Betteridge? Whatever for?
I don't quite know, my lady. He is returning, naturally. I can only put it down to one of Mr. Franklin's freaks. He galloped off on a horse almost as soon as he got here.
Freaks, Betteridge? And no doubt it was one of Mr. Franklin's freaks, as you call them, that inspired his arrival some hours earlier than expected.
No doubt, my lady.
Tell me, Betteridge, what does Mr. Franklin look like?
Look like, Miss Rachel? Well, he looks like Mr. Franklin, I suppose.
Betteridge, don't be obtuse. You know very well what I mean. The last time I saw Mr. Franklin, he was a boy of 14. He promised to be tall, I remember.
Indeed, Miss Rachel, so he did. But tall? No, I would not describe him as tall.
But not short, Betteridge. Surely Mr. Franklin has not turned out short.
He does want middle height by an inch or two, or so it seems to me. But he's neat and slim, and he still has that bright, straightforward look in his eyes.
You will just have to contain your curiosity, Rachel, until Mr. Franklin has another of his freaks and returns. I'm going to my room. I don't know which is more fatiguing, the heat or the rector of Frizinghall.
I thought I slipped out of that rather neatly. But no sooner had I gone to my own little sitting room than I had difficulties with Penelope. You will remember it was Penelope who told Mr. Franklin of the Indians when he arrived, and sent him on to find me at the Shivering Sand. Did I mention that Penelope was my daughter? Well, at all events, I've mentioned it now. She was also Miss Rachel's maid, and no sooner had she taken Miss Rachel's sunshade and gloves than she came to question me.
Well, Father?
Well, what, my girl?
Now, Father, you know very well what.
What did Mr. Franklin say about the Indians when you told him?
Mr. Franklin and I went on, having dismissed the Indians as of no account whatsoever, to talk of foreign politics until we both fell asleep in the heat of the sun. Oh, by the by, I trust Rosanna returned satisfactorily. She left us in rather a hurry when Mr. Franklin found us.
It's funny you should say that, Father, because Rosanna's been acting very strange since she came back, and Mr. Franklin's at the bottom of it, if you want my opinion. She turned all colours of the rainbow and asked hundreds of questions about him, and when I said I thought it was extraordinary that a strange gentleman should have any interest for her, she grew quite angry with me. Well, really, Father, there's only one explanation for it.
Oh, and what might that be?
Why, Rosanna has fallen in love with Mr. Franklin at first sight.
Nay.
That's all it can be.
Fallen in love with him? Fallen in love with Mr. Franklin?
Yes.
Oh, come, that's the silliest thing I ever heard. Now, you just keep that idea to yourself. It would do the poor girl a deal of harm if that got about among the other servants. They have a low enough opinion of her as it is. Rosanna Spearman in love with Mr. Franklin. The very idea. Mr. Franklin returned from Frizinghall, and to my great disappointment, and no doubt to yours also, nothing had happened. He had not met with the Indians. He had deposited the Moonstone in the bank, and he had got the receipt for it safe in his pocket. I would have given something to have waited at table that evening, but waiting at dinner, except on high family festivals, was letting down my dignity in the eyes of the other servants. Penelope brought me some intelligence, however.
And really, Father, I've never known Miss Rachel so particular over dressing her hair. Oh, but it was worth all the trouble, every bit. She looked so bright and pretty when she went down to meet Mr. Franklin in the drawing room.
Later in the evening, we heard them singing duets, and my lady, on the piano, following them as it were over hedge and ditch, and seeing them safe through it in a manner most wonderful and pleasant to hear through the open window. Later still, I went to Mr. Franklin in the smoking-room with the soda-water and brandy, and found that Miss Rachel had put the diamond clean out of his head. When I endeavoured to lead the conversation to more serious things, all I could extract from him was...
Really, Betteridge, I've no hesitation in saying that Miss Rachel is the most charming girl I've seen since I came back to England.
Towards midnight, I went round the house to lock up, accompanied by my second-in-command, Samuel the footman. When all the doors were made fast, except the side door that opened onto the terrace, I sent Samuel to bed and stepped out for a breath of fresh air. The night was still and close, and the moon was at the full. I had come out on the dark side of the house, and as I looked to my left, I saw the shadow of a person thrown forward from behind the corner. Being old and sly, I forbore to call out, but my feet betrayed me on the gravel. Before I could steal round the corner, I heard lighter feet than mine, and more than one pair of them, retreating in a hurry. By the time I had got to the corner, the trespassers had run into the shrubbery and were lost to sight. From there they could easily make their way over our wall and into the road. While I was thinking what to do, I noticed for the first time a little bright object lying on the gravel under the light of the moon. I picked it up. It was a small bottle. Inside there was a thick, sweet-smelling liquor, as black as ink.
Well, you know, Betteridge, even in England there are people who believe that some have the power of seeing persons and things beyond the reach of human vision. They call it clairvoyance, brightness of sight. The Indians must believe the boy is one of these.
Just a lot of hocus-pocus, if you ask me.
Quite. But depend upon it, Betteridge, the Indians took it for granted that we should keep the diamond here, and they brought their clairvoyant boy to show them the way to it.
Do you think they'll try again, sir?
It depends on what the boy can really do. And if he can see the diamond inside the bank at Frizinghall, we shall be troubled with no more visits at present. But if he can't, we shall have another chance of catching the Indians in the shrubbery before many more nights are over our heads.
My own feeling was that the Indians had reports of Mr. Franklin having been seen at the bank and drew their own conclusions. Now pay close attention to what I say next. You will find it has a bearing on something that is still to come. Mr. Franklin dabbled in decorative painting. He had invented a new mixture to moisten paint with, which he described as a vehicle. What it was made of, I don't know. What it did, I can tell you in 2 words. It stank. Miss Rachel, being wild to try her hand at the new process, they set to work decorating her own little sitting-room door. Mr. Franklin scraped off all the nice varnish and made a surface to work on. Miss Rachel then covered the surface, under his direction, with birds and flowers and cupids, copied from a famous Italian painter whose name escapes me. When they were not riding or seeing company or taking their meals or singing their songs, there they were, with their heads together, spoiling Miss Rachel's sitting-room door. The servants' hall began to debate whether or not we should have a wedding in the house before the summer was over. That Mr. Franklin, on his side, was in love, no one who saw him could doubt. The difficulty was to fathom Miss Rachel. There was also her other cousin, Mr. Godfrey Ablewhite.
Mr. Godfrey, father? How can you possibly think Mr. Godfrey's chances are better than Mr. Franklin's?
For one thing, Mr. Godfrey is very well off. Mr. Franklin, I fear, is always in want of money.
How can you possibly know that?
Because I know Mr. Franklin, that's how. Only the other day that foreigner called to see him on business, and he was very quiet for a whole day afterwards. That was over some debt while he was travelling on the continent, you can be quite sure of that.
As if Miss Rachel was the sort to marry for money.
It's not just money. Mr. Godfrey is a barrister by profession, and what is Mr. Franklin? Nothing. As a speaker at charitable committees, Mr. Godfrey is tireless. What does Mr. Franklin do besides ride out and sing pretty songs and spoil young ladies' sitting-room doors?
But would Mr. Godfrey make any sacrifice for Miss Rachel? You know how fond Mr. Franklin is of his cigars. Yet when Miss Rachel said she hated the smell of them in his clothes, he instantly offered to give them up, and he did so.
Yes, and that night he slept so badly for want of tobacco and looked so haggard and worn the next day that Miss Rachel begged him to go back to smoking again.
And he refused because he said he could take to nothing that would cause her a moment's annoyance.
What about the presents? The beautiful casket in china from Mr. Godfrey with his love and best wishes, and a plain little locket from Mr. Franklin not worth half the money.
How could it be, seeing you're so positive Mr. Franklin has none? Besides, do you really think Miss Rachel could be moved by such a consideration as that? If you ask me, Miss Rachel would sooner marry the dustman than Mr. Godfrey Ablewhite.
Shortly before Miss Rachel's birthday on the 21st, we had the doctor in the house professionally. He was summoned to prescribe for Rosanna Spearman, and as it was a matter concerning one of the servants, my lady naturally wanted to hear my opinion of the matter.
Waking and crying at night, loss of appetite. Yes, I put it down to nerves, Lady Verinder. I doubt if the girl's fit for service.
Would a change of air be beneficial, do you think, Mr. Candy?
Indeed, a change of air is often most beneficial in cases like this. I would strongly advise it, if it be possible.
Would you like to go to one of our farms inland, Rosanna? Perhaps as a dairymaid? And getting more fresh air than you do here, you would find your spirits improve remarkably.
Oh, my lady, I know you mean to be helpful, but I do so love it here. I would be far worse if you sent me away from here and all of you. I'm so grateful to you, my lady, for giving me a chance. Please let me stay.
Oh, Betteridge, what do you say?
Well, my lady, seeing as Mr. Candy thinks it's nerves and Rosanna does so want to stay, it would only do her nerves more harm to send her away. At least that's how it seems to me. I have no complaints of her work, my lady.
Very well, Rosanna, you may stay. But no more crying at night, do you hear? It cannot be good for you to lose your sleep.
Thank you, my lady.
As you wish, my lady, but I still think a change of air's the thing.
Thank you, Mr. Candy. And I look forward to seeing you at dinner on Rachel's birthday.
Oh, it will be my pleasure, my lady.
That proved to be the worst advice I could have given, though I meant only to help Rosanna. If I could have looked a little way into the future, I would have taken her out of the house then and there with my own hand. Later the very same day, Penelope made an awkward discovery which we hushed up on the spot. She caught Rosanna at Mr. Franklin's dressing table, secretly removing a rose which Miss Rachel had given him to wear in his buttonhole, and putting another rose like it, of her own picking, in its place. June the 21st, the day of the birthday, was cloudy and unsettled at sunrise, but towards noon it cleared up bravely. After breakfast, Mr. Franklin and I had a private conference on the subject of the Moonstone.
I must own, Betteridge, I'm in 20 different minds about what to do.
Why, how can that be, Mr. Franklin? There is only one thing to do. Take the Moonstone out of the bank at Frising Hall and present it to Miss Rachel.
Oh, yes, that's all very well, but what if...
But nothing, sir. Nothing can alter the legal obligation you have to give the diamond to Miss Rachel. And nothing has happened to justify you in alarming my lady.
Nothing? What about the prowlers in the night?
They haven't bothered us since, and we have no proof that the diamond was what they were after. Well, that's my way of looking at it.
Betteridge, you were not followed on 3 separate occasions by a man with a dark skin. I must own that I'm a little nervous about riding back from Frising Hall alone and with the Moonstone in my pocket.
Well, there's a way out of that difficulty, sir.
Huh?
Mr. Godfrey sent a note this morning. He was obliged to consult his father on business, and he spent last night at Frising Hall. He intends to ride over in good time for dinner this evening with his sisters. Now, what could be more natural than for you to return in their company?
Yes, Betteridge, what a good idea. That's what I shall do. But first, Miss Rachel and I have got to finish that door.
Oh, dear.
And we shall want Penelope to mix the colours again, so perhaps you'd send her up at the first opportunity.
They used the whole morning and part of the afternoon in the everlasting business of the door. It was 3 o'clock before Miss Rachel and Mr. Franklin took off their aprons and released Penelope and cleaned themselves of their mess. But they had finished the door on the birthday, and proud enough they were of it. Mr. Franklin snatched a morsel from the luncheon table and rode off to Frising Hall to escort his cousins, the Ablewhites, as he told my lady, to fetch the Moonstone, as was privately known to himself and me. This being one of the high festivals on which I took my place at the sideboard, I had plenty to occupy me while Mr. Franklin was away. Then I retired to collect myself over a pipe of tobacco. I was aroused by the clatter of horses' hoofs outside, and going to the door, received a cavalcade comprising Mr. Franklin and his 3 cousins, escorted by a groom.
Ah, my dear Betteridge, good day.
Good day, Mr. Godfrey, sir, good day.
But so hot, Betteridge, so hot. However, I'm most glad to see you wearing so well.
That's very kind of you, sir. You do not seem to be quite your usual self, if I may say so.
Ah, the pressures of the world, I fear, Betteridge.
Quite, sir, quite. And your father? I trust you found him in good health?
Much as usual, Betteridge. Felicity, Georgina, do stop gossiping and come inside, out of the heat.
Oh, Godfrey, you know how much I've been looking forward to meeting Mr. Franklin after all these years.
And since you monopolised him all the way over.
With your everlasting business.
We were just making up a little leeway. Betteridge!
Oh, Betteridge, looking younger than ever.
How do you do it? You must have the secret of perpetual youth.
Felicity, Georgina, a word in your ear.
Mr. Franklin, sir, have you got the diamond safe?
Here in my breast pocket, Betteridge. Safe as the bank of Frising Hall.
And the Indians, did you see anything of them?
Not a sign, not a glimpse.
Then you will wish to give the diamond into Miss Rachel's hands as soon as maybe.
Immediately, and then my duty is done. But I have first to tell Lady Verinder about the Colonel's bequest and give her the copy of that part of the will. Where is she, Betteridge?
In the small drawing room, sir.
I shall go there directly. Perhaps you would ask Miss Rachel to come along too in a minute?
Very good, Mr. Franklin.
Cousins, pray excuse me for a few minutes. I have some small business with Aunt Julia and Rachel. Then I think I can promise you a surprise.
About half an hour afterwards, I was crossing the hall when I was brought to a standstill by an outbreak of screams from the small drawing room. I can't say I was at all alarmed, for I recognised them as the screams of the Miss Ablewhites, and they screamed at anything and everything. However, I went in to discover whether anything serious had really happened. There stood Miss Rachel at the table with the Colonel's diamond in her hand. There, on either side of her, knelt the 2 Miss Ablewhites, devouring the jewel with their eyes and screaming with ecstasy. There, at the opposite side of the table, stood Mr. Godfrey, clapping his hands like a large child and singing out softly,
Exquisite. Oh, exquisite.
There sat Mr. Franklin in a chair by the bookcase, tugging at his beard and looking anxiously towards the window. And there, at the window, stood my lady, the extract from the Colonel's will in her hand, her back turned on the whole of the company.
Yes, Betteridge.
Excuse me, my lady, but I wondered if you had any particular instructions about the dinner.
Come to my room in half an hour. I shall have something to say to you then. Godfrey, pray excuse me. I should like to rest before dinner.
Look, Gabriel, come and look at my wonderful gift from Uncle John.
Lord bless us. That is a diamond. Why, it must be as big as a plover's egg, or nearly.
Close the shutters, someone, so that we may see it in the dark. Godfrey, would you mind?
Of course, Rachel. Mere carbon, Betteridge, mere carbon, after all. And how it does excite the ladies.
And not only the ladies, Mr. Godfrey. Some men would commit any wickedness to possess a jewel like that.
Very true, Betteridge, my good friend. Very true, unhappily.
Look at it now, in the dark. Just look at the way it glows. It's like the harvest moon.
Oh, it's lovely, Rachel. Quite lovely.
Oh, you are lucky. I wish that I had such a jewel, don't you, Felicity?
Oh, yes, Georgina. You'll be the envy of the county with this, Rachel. Won't you, Godfrey?
Of all society, my dear Felicity.
Oh, Godfrey.
There's only one thing that troubles me. Why should my Uncle John have left me this? I do believe he never even saw me, and by all accounts he was a dreadful man. Franklin, have you no idea?
No, Rachel. I wish from the bottom of my heart that I had.
It is so beautiful. I must wear it at dinner tonight.
Oh, yes, you must.
But I can't. There is no setting for it.
I dare say I could make something that would do for a temporary setting. A bit of silver wire and a pin so that you could fix it to your dress, if that's what you want.
Oh, Franklin, could you?
Of course.
Such ingenuity, Franklin. We shall all be in your debt.
At the end of half an hour, I presented myself in my lady's room. What passed between us was a repetition of what had passed between Mr. Franklin and me at the Shivering Sand, with this difference, that I kept my own counsel about the Indians. When I left, I could see that Lady Verinder took the blackest possible view of Colonel Herncastle's motives, and that she was bent on getting the Moonstone out of Rachel's possession at the first opportunity. The time came for me to spartan myself up for receiving the company, and just as I had got my white waistcoat on, Penelope knocked at my door on pretence of improving the tie of my cravat.
News for you, Father. Miss Rachel has refused him.
Oh, and who's him?
The ladies' committee man, Mr. Godfrey. Oh, how I hate him for trying to stand in the way of Mr. Franklin.
Nay, Penelope, not so tight.
Sorry, Father, but I know you agree with me.
Well, that's as may be. And how do you know Miss Rachel has refused him?
I saw him take her away alone into the rose garden, and I followed them.
Penelope, that was most improper of you.
Now, don't interrupt, Father. And where's your hairbrush? They'd gone out, arm in arm, both laughing. I waited behind the holly bush to see what happened.
Well, girl, get on with it.
They came back, walking separate, as grave as could be, and looking straight away from each other. I was never more delighted in my life.
Here, Ma'am, what are you doing with that brush?
Just the other side of the holly, Mr. Godfrey came to a standstill.
Then you prefer that I should remain here as if nothing had happened?
You have accepted my mother's invitation, and you are here to meet her guests. Unless you wish to make a scandal, of course you will remain.
I am sorry if what I have said has caused you any pain or distress.
Let us forget what has passed. Let us remain just cousins. Now, please excuse me. I must go in and change for dinner.
Now that's awkward. Very deuced awkward indeed.
And you never saw a man look more put out in all your life, Father. He ground quite a hole in the gravel with his heel.
Not so hard, Penelope. My head's as red as a lobster, and you should not have eavesdropped like that.
There's one woman in the world who can resist Mr. Godfrey Ablewhite at any rate. And if I was a lady, I should be another.
It was a noble sight to see when all the company were settled in their places and the rector of Frizinghall, with beautiful elocution, rose and said grace. But as the dinner got on, I became aware that this festival was not prospering as others had before it. There were gaps of silence in the talk, and when they did use their tongues, it was usually in the most unfortunate manner. Mr. Franklin, I regret to say, was no exception.
Yes, it is true, Mr. Candy, that latterly I have not slept very well at night.
Your nerves are all out of order, young man. You ought to go through a course of medicine immediately.
In my estimation, Mr. Candy, a course of medicine and a course of groping in the dark mean one and the same thing.
But you yourself, constitutionally speaking, are groping in the dark after sleep, and nothing but medicine will help you find it.
Why, Mr. Candy, I've often heard of the blind leading the blind, and now for the first time I find out what it means.
You go too far, young man, you go too far. You think medicine of no account and doctors a bunch of fools, do you? Well, a fool I may be, but I can still make you eat your words tomorrow morning.
A fool you certainly are, Mr. Candy, if you think I shall eat any words I've addressed to you tonight.
Franklin, Mr. Candy, really this is too disagreeable. I forbid you to discuss the subject any further.
Of course, Lady Verinder. For my part, secure in my scientific knowledge, I shall gladly bow to your wish.
Shall we withdraw, ladies?
Yes, indeed. It seems as though the devil possessed that dinner party, and worse was to come. The ladies had just risen to leave the gentlemen over their wine, when there was a sound from the terrace which startled me out of my company manners on the instant.
Georgina, hark, the Indians.
Oh, the Indians from Frizinghall.
Come and show us their juggling.
Oh, exciting.
Oh, the sweet little boy.
Oh, what a little darling.
Oh, I must kiss him.
And I.
As I lived by bread, here were the Indians returning to us with the return of the Moonstone to the house. Mr. Franklin got on one side of Miss Rachel, and I put myself behind her. There she stood, innocent of all knowledge of the truth, showing the Indians the Moonstone in the bosom of her dress. The next thing I clearly remember was one of the company, Mr. Murthwaite, the famous Indian traveller, coming up quietly behind the jugglers and addressing them in their own language. The next moment their faces turned grey. The chief Indian, the one who spoke English, turned to my lady and informed her that the entertainment was over. The Miss Ablewhites were loud in their disappointment. The little boy went round with the hat, and the juggling was over as soon as almost it had begun. The ladies withdrew to the drawing-room, the gentlemen returned to their wine, and I and Samuel the footman saw the Indians safe off the premises. Going back by way of the shrubbery, I found Mr. Franklin and Mr. Murthwaite walking slowly up and down among the trees. Mr. Franklin beckoned me to join them.
Mr. Betteridge, I have spent many years in India, and I can assure you that those three Indians are no more jugglers than you or I.
Really, Mr. Murthwaite, then what are they?
Unless I'm mistaken, they are high-caste Brahmins. I know what Indian juggling really is. What you saw tonight is a very bad and clumsy imitation. When I spoke to them in Hindu, I accused them of being impostors, and you saw yourself how it told on them.
But I thought Brahmins would never, under any circumstances, sacrifice their caste.
Quite right. And these have doubly sacrificed it, first in crossing the sea, secondly in disguising themselves as jugglers. There must be something very serious at the bottom of it to plead for them when they return to their own country. I suppose you have no idea what it might be, Mr. Blake?
Yes, I have. The diamond Miss Verinder is wearing in her dress this evening was left to her by her uncle, Colonel Herncastle, who obtained it in India some 50 years ago. I brought it here from London, acting as executor, and I suspect that while taking it from the bank, I was followed by a dark-skinned man.
If the diamond was of some sacred significance to the Hindus, then that would certainly explain the presence here of the three Indians.
All we know, sir, is that the Colonel got it in some mysterious way in his travels. We don't know that it has to do with their religion.
Ah, yes, we do, Betteridge. Now, I had a letter from Mr. Brough this morning. I wrote to tell him that it looked as though the Indians really were after the Moonstone, and he sent me a document he'd been holding back. It was written by a cousin of John Herncastle and describes how he got the diamond at the taking of Seringapatam. The writer says he thinks that Herncastle had killed 3 Indians, not in the fighting, but during the looting which followed, and had obtained the Moonstone at that terrible cost. That was why his reputation was in shreds when he returned to this country, and why none of his family would have anything to do with him.
And was this diamond set in the handle of a dagger?
Yes, it had belonged to a sultan. Tipu, Sultan of Seringapatam.
Well, so I have looked upon the Moonstone. Mr. Blake, the jewel that your cousin so carelessly wears in her bosom is the most sacred known to the Hindu people. If she were to set foot in certain parts of India dressed as she is tonight, her life would not be worth 5 minutes' purchase.
Murthwaite, you can't mean it.
I'm afraid I do. Listen. I know the history of the Moonstone. It is centuries old, and tradition says that it was originally set in the forehead of the Indian god who typifies the moon. Hundreds of years ago, when the Mohammedans sacked the holy city of Somnath and stripped the temple of its treasures, only the moon god escaped. 3 Brahmins, at great risk, took it to Benares, and there it was set up and worshipped again. There's a legend that Vishnu appeared in a dream to the Brahmins and commanded that the Moonstone should be watched from that time forth by 3 priests in turn, night and day, to the end of the generations of men. The next turn in the story took place in the reign of Aurangzeb, the Mughal emperor. At his command there were more attacks upon the temples of Brahma, and the Moonstone was seized by an officer and his army. It passed from one lawless hand to another, until it fell into the possession of Tipu, who placed it as an ornament in the handle of a dagger. Now suppose those 3 men whom Herncastle is reported to have killed were the 3 Brahmin priests who were then the Moonstone's guardians, disguised and outwardly conforming to the Mussulman faith. Do you not begin to see who our 3 incompetent jugglers might be?
Lord bless us.
The 3 Brahmin priests who have succeeded to the guardianship of the Moonstone.
And dedicated, you may be sure, to securing its return at whatever cost.
You mean they would kill to gain their object?
My dear fellow, the sacrifice of caste may be a serious thing in India. The sacrifice of life is nothing.
What a set of murdering thieves.
Ah, but a wonderful people, Mr. Betteridge.
Yes, it sounds like it.
They have seen the Moonstone on Rachel's dress. There's no help for it. I must speak to my aunt tomorrow.
What about tonight, sir? Supposing the Indians come back?
The Indians won't risk coming back tonight. The direct way is hardly ever the way they take to anything, let alone something as important as this.
But suppose the rogues are bolder than you think, sir?
In that case, let the dogs loose.
Very good, sir.
It's been building up to this all day. The Indians will want their umbrellas tonight, Mr. Betteridge. Come, let us rejoin the ladies.
I own that after that I went back to my little room in a perspiration. I was far into my second pipe when Penelope came in with her report from the drawing-room where she'd been handing round tea.
The Miss Ablewhite sang a duet very loudly. I saw Mr. Franklin positively flinch. And Miss Rachel has been stealing looks at him, and I know very well what sort of looks. And Mr. Franklin has been going on at Mr. Godfrey about ladies' charities. And Mr. Godfrey has been hitting back rather smartly. And Mr. Murthwaite has been asleep. Oh, have you seen anything of Mr. Candy during the evening?
Why, no, should I have?
Well, he vanished most mysteriously for a time, and when he came back he was wearing a very smug look. I wonder what he's been up to.
The arrival of the carriages was the signal for the arrival of the rain. Most of the company went home under cover. The exception was Mr. Candy, who had only a gig, but he still seemed very pleased with himself.
It looks as though it means to rain all night. What a downpour. I'm afraid you'll get wet through, Mr. Candy.
Mr. Betteridge, I wonder you have arrived at your time of life without knowing that a doctor's skin is waterproof. Good night to you.
When the last of the guests had driven away, I went back to the drawing-room. Mr. Godfrey had some brandy and soda water. Mr. Franklin took nothing. He looked dead tired. I suppose the events of the day had been too much for him. Truth to tell, they'd been rather too much for me. My lady was looking hard at the wicked Colonel's legacy shining in her daughter's dress.
Rachel, where are you going to put your diamond tonight?
Oh, I don't know. Anywhere. Why, on my dressing table, of course, with my other things. Oh, no. It might take to shining in the dark. I'm sure I'd be quite terrified if I woke up and saw its awful moony light shining out of the gloom. I know. The Indian cabinet in my sitting room. Now, that is just the place, Mamma. What could be more appropriate than the Indian diamond going into the Indian cabinet? Why, they could admire each other.
My dear, your Indian cabinet has no lock on it.
Good heavens, is this an hotel? Are there thieves in the house?
Why not let me keep the diamond for you tonight?
Oh, Mamma, no. How could you suggest such a thing?
Very well, my dear, as you wish. But I'd like you to come to my room first thing tomorrow morning. I shall have something to say to you.
Not something unpleasant, I hope.
Well, I really can't discuss it with you in your present mood. Good night, gentlemen.
Good night,
Good night, Betteridge.
Good night, my lady.
And so the day ended. Already, it seemed to me, the Moonstone had begun to cast its shadow over our lives. When the gentleman retired for the night, Mr. Godfrey was very solicitous for Mr. Franklin's rest, and pressed him to take a brandy and soda to his room. It would help him sleep, he said. That night I shut up everything myself and left nothing to Samuel. All was safe and fast when I went to bed between midnight and 1 in the morning. The day had been a little too much for me, I suppose, for I had a touch of Mr. Franklin's malady, and it was sunrise before I fell asleep. All the time I lay awake there was not a sound but the splash of the rain and the sighing of the wind among the trees. About 7:30 I woke and opened my window on a day of fine sunshine. The clock had struck 8, and I was just going out to chain up the dogs again when I heard a sudden whisking of petticoats on the stairs above me.
Father, come quick!
Penelope, you'll wake the house, whatever's the matter.
Oh, Father, don't stand there, for God's sake. Come upstairs. The Moonstone has gone.
Gone? But how could it have gone?
Oh, how should I know? But gone it most certainly is. And Miss Rachel's half out of her mind. Oh, Father, come up and see.
That was part 1 of The Moonstone by Wilkie Collins, dramatised for radio by Brian Gear. The cast: Gabriel Betteridge, John Sharp, Franklin Blake, John Telfer, Rachel Verinder, Sally Baxter, Godfrey Ablewhite, Geoffrey Beavers, Lady Verinder, Petra Davis, Rosanna Spearman, Tammy Ustinoff, Penelope Betteridge, Josie Kidd, Mr. Berthwaite, Gordon DeLew, Mr. Candy, Danny Schiller, the Indian, Geoffrey Searle, the boy, Crispian Barmer, Felicity Ablewhite, Lisa Penny, and Georgina Ablewhite, Deborah Jane Sharp. The music was composed and conducted by Sidney Sager, and the programme, which came from Bristol, was directed by Brian Miller.